The Question by Arthur Gene Cox as Ralph Carghill. This story was published in the fall 1952 issue of Fantastic Story magazine. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel Quasar Spectra. The Question. Tap, tap, tap went Hershey's pencil against the tabletop, and suddenly he found himself listening to catch the meaning in that too steady rhythm of the code being tapped out there. Tap, tap, tap. And then he knew the meaning of the action itself. He was trying to convince himself that the world was solid, that the world was real and not a dream. As a cybernetician, the action had a more specific meaning for him. He was trying to break the cyclic neural processes, trying to come back to an awareness of the objective level. Taking the thought as a cue, he looked about him. Thomas Bonham and he were alone in this large room, yet not alone. One wall was an instrument panel, and upon its dull surface indicator lights glowed palely, watching them with perhaps casual contempt. Of the other three walls, two were vacant, but one was occupied almost in its entirety by a great window through which he could see the wide, campus-appearing lawns and buildings. But those plain, blank-walled structures housed no classrooms, laboratories, workshops, gymnasiums, or libraries. They were a cote, a shelter for a single great mechanorganic entity, Top C. Top C had often been called the greatest of mankind's achievements, but in a sense it was its own achievement too. Those millions of tubes and marvelously delicate organs had not been turned out one by any human factory, but as a yeast multiplies, they had been created within the very body of the giant organism itself. Although there seemed little humor in it now, the name Top C had been selected for humorous reasons. Just a nightmare before, when the order had come through to undertake certain alterations upon the calculator, it had revealed capacities and abilities which it had long hidden unsuspected within its vast recesses, and more than that, a creature-like determination to survive and resist amputation. The events had been brief in duration, but terrifying in implication. 3 workmen, in attempting to remove a panel piece, collapsed. Examination showed no evident cause of death. An electrician about to disconnect some wiring crumpled to the floor. Again, cause of death was unapparent. An engineer, on the point of issuing some orders, whitened and fell. Reports of the deaths were unable to reach the outside world, for telephones refused to function, cars wouldn't start, and 2 men who tried to walk to a nearby rural community were seen to collapse on the horizon. And for the first time, the calculator had answered a question not put directly to it. On the neural level of the human organism, subtle arrhythmic processes occur. The serrated edge of a sheet of paper torn in half might well be a graph of any given impulse. Even with its vast complexities, Top C could not change the edge of that graph, could not alter the peaks and valleys in accordance with its own wishes. If it could, mankind could have instantly been reduced to a slave state, but it could, in effect, take both sheets of paper and place the torn edges together so that both again formed a single sheet. That is, it could blanket out the neutral processes, and there was no distance limitation, it seemed, to the effectiveness of this ability. And so, its wishes had to be obeyed, and it had wished for all to leave except 2 men, Marshall Hershey and Thomas Bonham. It was as if the 2 had been summoned before some mysterious monarch for a strange audience. A red light joined the others on the panel and winked with sardonic solemnity, and then the wall stuck out its tongue at them, giving a momentarily grotesque air to the whole affair. Bonham grabbed and pulled. 3 card-like strips joined together with perforated edges, much like oversized tickets to an amusement theater, emerged from the slit. Words were typed upon them in large, dark letters. The first said, I shall assume that the two of you are representative of the intelligent portion of humanity, and you shall be the direct participants in a test which I have prepared for mankind. If you pass the test, mankind survives. If you fail, mankind dies. The second. For 7.3289 years you have kept the world busy finding questions that I should answer. Is it not appropriate, then, that your fate should be decided by a question? You must forgive the absence of a question mark at the end of the preceding sentence, but my builders didn't provide me with one, as they failed to foresee some of my potentialities. Read carefully. The thing which you must do is find the most important question that mankind must ask itself today, and which it has been asking itself for some time. So you have a riddle. It is one which I know, and which I have asked myself many times in the past. It is possible that your kind will never know any of the answers, but if you cannot at least ask a question so pertinent to your survival, how can I find any excuse for your continued existence? Question mark. The third. You have 13 hours and approximately 2 minutes to discover the question. That is, until 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, you will be allowed to ask one question only, and both must agree on the answer. Knowing what fragile, ephemeral creatures men are, I must multiply that is only if both are in existence at that time. So hurry. Time is on the wing. Hershey felt as if he were looking at the world through a pane of glass. He read the cards again and again, and then again. A question. He noticed that he was shivering ever so slightly, and this surprised him, as inwardly he felt calm. He took a deep breath, and the tremor faded. His first real sensation of fear came only when he turned and faced Bonham. Bonham was a man whom he had seen only a few times, but in those times he had formed a distinct impression of the person, and it wasn't entirely favorable. Hershey did not regard himself as a judge of men. As is common with many retiring people, he came to opinions about other people slowly, and if there was an individual whom he didn't like, he didn't stay around long enough to find out why. He simply retreated from his company to his own little group of intimates. But Bonham was a man who came to you. He left his mark. When you had seen him 2 or 3 times, you had seen so much of him that there was very little left. In describing him, Hershey could say that Thomas Bonham was small and stocky and dark. He could say that Bonham was aggressive and loud, that he was sure of things, that he was seldom in doubt. He could say that the man was intelligent, but that intelligence can be used for a weapon or a tool, for rationalism or rationalization. The basis of Hershey's fear was this. The future of the entire human world was in the hands of the two of them. If there was any conflict between their choices, Bonham would aggressively try to carry out his own without giving intelligent consideration to his. Bonham habitually reacted against doubt in a positive manner. It seemed monstrously ridiculous that in the face of such a tremendous crisis, personality differences should even be considered. But Top C itself had made them greatly important, with both must agree on the answer. "Well," said Bonham, breaking the long silence, "don't stand there petrified with fright. Snap out of it. Buck up. If we're to find an answer, we'd best be mulling the thing over." Hershey looked at him in surprise, and then grasped the meaning of his words and realized that Bonham, besides misinterpreting his hesitation, was showing his typical self-confidence in failing to see where the second conflict situation might develop. "I think," said Hershey, "that we can do our mulling in some other part of the building, say the kitchen. I suggest some coffee. We're going to be up quite a while." "Just what I was thinking," answered Bonham. "Some coffee will do you good. Come on." As they were walking, Hershey thought, "The problem is to put the emphasis where it belongs. It is difficult to grasp the idea of the destruction of all mankind. It is far easier to think of the problem in terms of personality differences, to attempt to attach one's anxieties to something concrete, something which could be seen and possibly handled. There was the basis of his concern with Bonham. About the real problem, the question, he had not yet had a single thought. Hershey had a brief, dim picture of death reaching out and touching men everywhere, of over 2 billion human beings collapsing in their offices, homes, streets, beds, and cradles, a silent, peaceful death, punctuated here and there with occurrences of startling violence, hundreds of thousands of suddenly pilotless planes falling from the sky, millions of clashing automobiles creating a disharmonious symphony shaking the cities, and a million other catastrophes poking noisy holes in the vast silent blanket of death. There was one rewarding factor. If they failed, they wouldn't have much of an opportunity to feel guilty about it. Several cups of coffee later, though, Hershey's fears about Bonham were returning in full force. Could he, by simple discussion, channel the energies of this hypercorticated ox? He doubted it. He'd never been very good at persuasion, or actually conversation of any sort. His lifelong interest had been in mathematics, and now he could find, in 30 years of life, no training which could help him in this critical situation. They had spent most of the past 3 hours arguing about methods for determining what the question could be. 3 hours out of 13. Their disagreement was basic. "I think you're missing something basic," said Hershey. "Examine our past relationships with Topsy, as now it was a question-answer relationship, with a difference, of course. Our questions all had a similar form. We had an unfinished equation, one with several factors present and one or two missing. The calculator's answer consisted of filling in the missing factors. For our practical purposes, that situation is now reversed. Topsy's statements can be regarded as a question, the question for which we're looking as the answer. All we have to do is examine Topsy's statements to find what factors are present so that we can formulate our answer. In other words, Topsy has never been asked to pick an answer to a question out of thin air in all its history. We have no reason to believe that it expects us to do so either. Our answer probably lies implied in some form, in its question." Bonham shook his head slowly. "You know what you're doing. You're giving the machine credit for too much. You've personified it. I understand, old boy, for I have a tendency to do that myself. It's impressive to us because it has such an elaborate structure. It's like a skyscraper. It may be big, but it's still made of bricks, just as this machine is made of tubes and circuits. About the best it can do is make certain variations on material already fed into it." He poured himself a cup of coffee and banged the pot back down upon the burner. "Do you know where it got its knowledge? From books. The entire contents of dozens of books on every subject have been fed into that calculator. Remember the group that was investigating Zipf's theory of least effort? They wanted to find out if the number of times a word was used in a given work multiplied by its frequency in relation to other words actually did equal the number of words in the book. What books did they run through? And then there was that Psychometric Institute, which wished to make cluster analyses of the works of several modern authors. How many books did they put through? There may be several dozen, but our machine's knowledge is limited to those few books. And the question, the answer it wants, is to be found somewhere in them. The thing to do is find out what books they were and go through them as quickly as possible." Hershey was almost petrified by the suggestion. "It would take too long. We've wasted too much time already. We've no guarantee it's in the books. You've underestimated Topsy. It even shows a sense of humor. The past few hours have unnerved you," said Bonham. "Now just take it easy. By making random selections, I can go through the books in just a few hours. First, I'll begin with the books on philosophy which have been fed it, and then go on to the others." "No," said Hershey. "No, it's too much of a chance. There's too much at stake. Have you ever gambled?" asked Bonham suddenly. "Well, yes, once or twice. I don't care much for it." "That's what I thought," said Bonham. "Well, we have to gamble now. All life's a gamble. You just have to take chances. Certainly, random selection is not a perfect method, but the machine is limited to it also. Why do you suppose the calculator selected you and me for this contest? It did so by random selection. Right there, that shows the limitations of the method in the machine." He poured himself still another cup of coffee. "The two of us are not very much alike, I'm afraid. No, not alike at all." "That's assuming," thought Hershey, "that the machine wanted us alike, wanted a team of people who could work together. Maybe it would rather be amused than impressed with team harmony and efficiency." Sipping his coffee slowly, Bonham asked, "Do you have a copy of the machine's statements?" "Yes," nodded Hershey, guessing what was coming. "Well, I suggest," said Bonham with a note of finality in his voice, "that two minds are better than one, apart. Together, they just increase the chances of being wrong by getting into some kind of conversational thought rut. Suppose we separate for a few hours. Either one of us might run into the correct answer, huh?" Hershey felt humiliated, but he said, "I was thinking something like that myself." Bonham made no motion as if to move, so he assumed that it was up to him to leave. "I'll go to the study room," he added. As he arose, he saw that Bonham was thrusting his arm out across the table to shake his hand in a gesture of comradeship. Hershey made the emotionally empty gesture. "Goodbye, old boy," said Bonham. As he walked down the darkened hall, he looked back and saw Bonham standing in the lighted doorway of the kitchen, looking out after him. It was possible that they were spending their last few hours alone. Then the nightmare hours began. To say that the deadline was less than 10 hours away was only true in one sense. The night was a warped eternity. At one and the same time, it seemed that the future was rushing down upon him with incredible speed, but that the present was departing into the past with an equally incredible slowness. The sensation was much the same as one gets while falling from some small height. Each second as sharp and clear as Venetian glass, and yet the entire fall lasting hardly at all. He became so annoyed at the frequency with which he glanced nervously at his watch, interrupting his ideas, that in self-anger he finally removed it from his wrist and deposited it on a shelf of the study. He had had an impulse to rush to the library and skim through some philosophy books, but he repressed that. They might only mislead him, swing him by the weight of their words from a direction which was not the necessary one. But, nevertheless, he thought back and over the past, asking himself the questions which the wise old beards of the ages must have asked themselves. What is beauty? Whither goeth the world? What is the basic nature of matter? Is there life after death? Is the universe finite or infinite? How many angels can dance on the point of a pin? What is meaning? But the questions sounded so pompous and artificial that they embarrassed him. They seemed empty of what he was searching for. Somehow he was going about it wrongly. What is truth? 2,000 years and the appearance of the operational method made Pilate's jesting question seem rather childish. What is a question? For a moment that seemed hopeful, because the whole basis of the scientific method was tied up with it. There seemed also to be some connection with the machine's statements, and yet, for some reason, it didn't sound right, perhaps because it was too non-operational in its nature. He decided to pigeonhole it until something further occurred to him. What is the question? No, he doubted that Topsy would play such a roundabout game as that. It must have been early morning by that time. Hershey left the library and walked, asking questions of the empty air. Several times he wandered past open portions of the machine which showed through cutaway sections of the wall, reminding him of large gaping wounds. The first time he had had an impulse to throw some heavy object into its vitals, but repressed it. To smash a single tube would be ridiculously ineffectual. Besides, though Topsy couldn't feel a tube being broken, it had its ways of knowing what was going on. Yesterday, a workman had discovered, just before he died, that a harmless-appearing light bulb could contain not only filaments but a watchful eye. Hershey thought in expectancies. First there would appear a vague dawning sensation, and then, like an object rising slowly to the surface of the sea, an answer to a particular problem would appear. In a way, it was a form of unconscious cerebration, and one he shared with others, including his professional predecessor, the famous mathematician Poincaré. The feeling was strong in him now, and yet when the answer did appear it took him by surprise, for it approached him at an oblique angle while he compared his gloomy wanderings through the darkened halls to those of another person. It was an inspiration which froze him. For a long instant he stood statue still, as if afraid that a sudden movement would frighten the idea away. And then, pivoting on the balls of his feet, he was racing down the passageway, the precision-like beat of soles against floor following close upon his heels. As he ran, he thought, "And so soon, too! It must not be more than a few hours since—" He burst into the sunlit library. Sunlit! Again he faltered, almost tripped by dismay. The dimly lighted hallways had had no windows anywhere, but here? What time was it? There was nothing to hold him in the library. The expected Bonham was not there, so he ran to the study. The watch he had left on the library shelf said 6:17. He held it in a moist, trembling hand and breathed a deep sigh of relief. He still had time, plenty of time. He found a sheet of paper and wrote his question upon it, and with sheer exultance read it over and over again. And each time he read it, the conviction grew that here was what they were searching for. Topsy had been devilishly clever, he thought. By asking the question, he had made the question itself, not just the finding of it important to them. Their finding the question answered it for them, at least temporarily. It certainly was pertinent to their survival. The problem now was, would Bonham accept it? Or would he have some other question which he considered more likely? Despite his awareness of Bonham's bigoted and aggressive nature, he found it incredible that the man shouldn't be excited about his discovery. Of course, it was possible that this wasn't the question, and that Bonham did have it, but the probability approached 0. Suppose, just suppose, that Bonham had what he thought was the answer, but which he, Hershey, didn't like. How would Bonham take his answer? Bonham wouldn't take it. Feeling that his own question was the answer, he would attempt to enforce its acceptance. Hershey would have virtually no say in the matter, and with his comparative slight build, he would never be able to stop Bonham. His feeling of elation subsided as suddenly as if it had been crushed. It wasn't a just suppose matter. The chances that Bonham would react in that way were so high as to be appalling. For several heartbeats he stood stunned, not really thinking, not even really feeling, except in a vague, negative way. Then appeared the thought which was simple in itself, and yet was a catalyst moving him into action. He knew that in the right-hand top drawer of the desk in the director's office there was a gun, a black German Luger-like gun, an equalizer which would put the two of them on more even footing. His hand was on the knob of the door of the office when, reluctantly, a new realization formed. Perhaps I'm just fooling myself. Perhaps in the back of my mind I've been planning this all along, thinking half-thoughts about it, waiting for the moment when I could reveal it to myself, waiting for the moment when I could put it into action. This is the crisis. If mankind survives, this event will be remembered for all time to come. Bonham and I will be known as the saviors of mankind, of all mankind. But if just one of us survives, he alone would be the hero, the savior. He had a brief, spasmodic picture of Bonham jerking as bullets pounded into him. Yes, he could tell the world what happened, that Bonham's stupidity came near to destroying them all, that he had to kill for the greatest good. It would sound good. He knew that instinctively, and instinctively his hand withdrew from the knob. Still doubtful, he retreated a half-dozen steps facing the baffling blankness of the door, then turned and paced methodically down the long corridor. He felt as if the doorknob was a cold eye staring at the small of his back. He walked down the long halls to the question room, where he knew Bonham would be waiting. There was little sense of triumph in him. Instead, a dull anxiety and loneliness. Bonham was half-perched on the big table when he entered, facing the door. The man had a peculiar, resigned expression, and he was, strangely enough, wearing his pince-nez, something which he seldom did, as his vanity refused him permission to wear any kind of glasses, though he needed them badly. It was as if, in this critical moment, he didn't want to miss anything. He touched them now, adjusting them with over-preciseness into place, before he said, "I see that you have found a question. Don't bother to tell me what it is. I have the right one. I'm sure of that, and at this desperate stage I hardly intend opening myself to any argument. Doubtlessly you will feel that I have some pathological reason behind this, and possibly you are correct. But that is something which I can't afford to consider at the moment." Even expecting what he had, Hershey was astounded. He hesitated, looking for a verbal opening to begin the presentation of his case. "All mankind is depending upon my decision," Bonham continued, "and thus acting on the self-evident fact that drastic circumstances call for drastic measures. I'm going to hope that that is excuse enough for what I'm about to do." Hershey's gaze had shifted to a book lying on the tabletop, and in the one swift movement in which he had read the title, the truth flashed home to him. But that moment's gaze and recognition had cost him an awareness of something else, a movement which Bonham had made. His right hand had dipped into a pocket and emerged again, weighted with a German Luger-like gun. That gun was suddenly obscured by a flash of flame. Thunder spread out and slapped the walls of the room. A spot, like a hole burned through layer and layer of bloody silk, appeared on Hershey's stomach. He writhed, and his contorted limbs were like the fingers of a fist, which crumpled the universe into a wad. There was horror and dismay and anger and memory of things past in that movement. The second bullet had a lesser effect, merely as if a thread attached to his puppet body had been jerked. But the third was a great dark fist which descended out of the skies. "Well," thought Bonham, "any future historian telling the story of the question from Hershey's viewpoint would have to end it here, but the story itself is not terminated." 14 minutes and 25 seconds before the deadline, Bonham had the answer bitten into a card and speeding into the recesses of the machine. 14 minutes and 6 seconds before the deadline, a blue card popped out of the slit with a simple one-word response written on it. "Correct." Nothing else. Bonham stared at it, aware of a tremendous disappointment. It seemed too simple, too easy. He looked about him. Everything was just as it had been a few seconds before. The same sun was shining, and there was the same warm smell within the room, but there was a new anxiety inside him. He shrugged his shoulders. After all, he couldn't expect the machine to shoot off rockets, play Hail the Hero, and wave flags. Bloom was about to turn away when there was a second, almost inaudible whirr, and another card popped out. He froze on the spot and was startled by two simultaneous conflicting emotions. A little too quickly, He turned and jerked the second card from the machine. He drowned his fear of the unknown thing on the card under a wave of action and read, "You have solved the problem which existed on a racial scale, but created a new personal one for yourself. Can you solve that one as easily? Question mark. Look in Hershey's breast coat pocket." The fear fled, and without its hampering presence he recognized the second emotion for what it was: relief. For Topsy had become something personal again, something strange in form, perhaps, but not something cold and abstract. He realized then that his execution of Hershey in the presence of a third person had somehow made it seem justified. That was why he was disturbed when the machine had replied in such an abstract, depersonalized manner. Impatiently, he shoved the thought aside. Look in Hershey's breast coat pocket. He hesitated only for a moment, and then, again drowning fear under action, stepped forward and half lifted the corpse while his fingers, carefully avoiding the blood, probed into the pocket. He found a folded piece of paper. Adjusting his pince-nez with a little tap, he unfolded the sheet of paper carefully. Written upon the paper, in Hershey's cramped style, were those same words which he had just a moment before fed into the calculator, the opening lines of Hamlet's soliloquy, "To be or not to be, that is the question." As the living Hershey had done but a little while before, Bonham read and reread those words. The question was the same as his own. That was the devastating thing. Marshall Hershey had died in violence and in vain. Presently he leaned against the table, and there was a smile on his lips, but it had more the appearance of a stain on his face than any natural expression. Hershey had been a man of indecision and thought, while Bonham was a man of decision and action. And more, he had a sense of dramatic justice, and would have to the end. There were things to do now, things to tell the world, and responsibilities to others. But soon he knew that he would have to ask himself that same question which he had put to Topsy, and he knew what his answer would be. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.